And we are live. G'day everyone and welcome back. My name is Mike Jeffrey and you are listening to My Creative Journey, episode number 5. To all those new people here today listening, I just want to say hello and welcome to the podcast. This is actually a pretty special episode for me, and while it may be episode number 5 of the podcast, it's actually the first episode that I've actually told anyone about. That's right. For the last 4 weeks, I haven't actually had anyone listening to the podcast except myself. Because I decided not to share it with anyone until I knew that it was ready, and today is that day. So that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about today, why I've kept this podcast a secret, and why I strongly encourage all of you to be proud of your work and just to share it with the world. But first, let's start with talking about what's been going on this week. For all of you, you wouldn't know the structure of this podcast. I normally start with about 10 to 15 minutes of me talking about things that have been happening through my week, and this week I had a fairly interesting week with my work, I guess. I spoke about on last week's podcast that I was trying to prioritize my own work. I'd sort of let that slip a bit by the wayside in trying to go too ambitiously towards my other goals for the year, and sort of forgot about my actual work that actually produces me an income, I guess. And so I tried to get back to a little bit of that this week and trying to advertise a bit more with my business and really trying to get that out there and get the word out that I still am in business, I guess, with such a long break between over the Christmas break there, especially, and in through January, where I didn't really put much on my social media and things like that. It's important, I think, to keep people informed and to let them know that you're still working away at stuff, while I am trying to move my style of work away from the things that I have been working on. It's still something that I enjoy and still something that I know I have to continue to do in order to make me some money. So I did put a bit of word out through last week just to try and encourage more people to inquire and ask a few questions and see if I can get any more work out of that sort of way. As I said last week, it's one of the most challenging things that I've found thus far with the business is actually trying to drum up a bit of business, I guess, in that trying to find clients has been one of the really challenging things for me. I don't come from any sort of like marketing background whatsoever, so that for me is very uncharted territory, and to be honest, something I find a bit challenging. It's not something that I'm used to trying to do and trying to market myself as a business and trying to put myself out there. I'm not someone who likes to talk up my own work in a way, and so to try and spruik that out to other people and trying to encourage them, I guess, why they should book with me has been one of those challenging things that I've had to learn to do, and I've had to try and get better at over the year. But hopefully it'll all start to work pretty soon, and we can get more of that business going along. In terms of other work this week, I've been working away on the podcast as usual, as through the weeks, and it's been a bit of an interesting one. I edited episode 3 last week, and that was quite a challenging episode, and then recorded episode 4, and that was really enjoyable. I actually quite enjoyed that one. You guys have probably heard it now, but as of today, when I'm recording episode 5, episode 4 isn't live yet, so we shall see when that should be out this week, and then episode 5 next week. But that was fairly enjoyable. I feel like with the podcast, it's been improving, and I said that in week 1. I sort of really scrambled to get through the first few episodes, and it was very tough to actually think of things to say, but then also to be able to sit down and actually have those things to say for an hour, half hour to an hour was very tough. And I can tell in just editing the podcast and that how far it has already come. I think not having to make as many changes throughout, and just not having to edit out as many pieces as I did in week 1. As I said, I was so surprised by the amount of words that I just said over and over again, and I just really wasn't making much sense at all. So I can see that is a progression, and I'm really starting to enjoy the work as well. I feel like this is something that I knew I would enjoy, and I knew that I had to just be willing to try to give it a chance. I think in the beginning it was tough to really sit down and get that first episode recorded, but once I did that, I think it really started to flow from there, and I've been really enjoying the process a lot more than than I thought I would. I was out in the park the other day, and there was this kid. He came out. He probably would have been about 15 years old, and he came out, and I could see him walking down the street, big smile on his face, ear to ear, and I was just wondering why. I'm just interested to see like what's happened in someone's life when they're just that happy and that ecstatic about life. And he walks over to the exercise equipment in the park, and he came and he hopped on the exercise equipment, and to be honest, he was doing, I don't know what exercise he was trying to do. I feel like he was trying to do exercises, but he just really wasn't doing them at all. But the whole time he was there, he was just smiling, and he just seemed like so happy with his whole life. And he was probably only there for about 5 minutes, and then he just started walking off again. And he was walking off in such a happy manner, like he was so proud of himself that he'd been there and he exercised for the day, which really he didn't really do a lot, but I sat back and I thought about that, and immediately I sort of thought, I feel like that's how I am with the podcast, and that's how it's been so far for me. I've been really enjoying it, even though I feel like I've got no idea what I'm up to, and I really, at the start, I didn't know what I was doing at all, and it's been something for me that I've been proud to turn up here every week and really record these episodes because, I am getting so much enjoyment out of it, even though I'm not really an expert at this whatsoever, and I don't really know the things that I'm going to be talking about every week to week, and I don't know the structure behind it, but I feel like I am starting to learn that, and at the end of the day, it's just about turning up, and if I can enjoy it, then I know this is going to be something that I can do long term, and I'm really, really looking forward to that and seeing where this goes over the next few months and years. The next point that I wanted to touch on was something else that happened through the week, and it was actually something a bit of a surprise to me in that I got a few messages out of the blue from some people that I just hadn't heard of for a long time, and I can't really know why they would have ever messaged me. It's not people that I actually have, not people that I have followed me on Instagram or anything like that. So for them to reach out and just send me a couple of messages, I thought was really strange, but also in a weird way, it was like, I was rather thankful that they did that, because I was talking about this a few weeks ago on the podcast and like how I just like to reply to people's Instagram stories and things like that and just hand them bits of like things that I'm thinking about, or like say that they're up to really good stuff and I'm really like enjoying to be able to keep up with their life and see where they're at, and how important I think that is to be able to support people in that sort of way. And when you can see that people are achieving things or trying to go through things, it's really important to keep up in that way. But I got a few messages through the week off some people who I just never expected to get messages from. And as I said, I don't know where they would have been reminded of me and my work from, but I'm really glad that they did reach out and send those messages, because I think it's so important just to, I don't think it ever hurts to be kind to people. And some people can sometimes forget that in the whole social media era of just scrolling past and just ignoring what people are actually up to, and being scared, I think, to actually reach out to people, especially when you haven't spoken to them in a long time. But I think that is when the messages start to become a lot more impactful as well, because you haven't heard from someone in so many years, and all of a sudden they just feel the need to reach out and tell you what a good job you have been doing, and that they're really enjoying the stuff that you've been up to. And I really think that is, I was really taken aback by that because of how out of the blue it was, and I just really enjoyed that. And so I just wanted to share that with you guys and just remind you all to just not be afraid to just send someone a message who you think is really achieving good work, or the opposite way, if you think someone's going through a bit of a hard time and you feel like you need to reach out to them, don't be afraid just because you haven't spoken to them in a long time. It's been tough. I know heaps of people who I'm friends with who I haven't seen in forever because of everything happening in the world right now. And I know over this last year it has been a way of some people I have had more contact with some people who I haven't been able to see face to face. So it's been in that way, it's been a really good thing, in that people are starting to feel a bit more comfortable with it's just reaching out to people who they haven't seen in a long while. So if you can take one thing away from this week's episode, guys, it's to go reach out to someone who you haven't spoken to in quite a while and just let them know that they're on the right track and they have been doing good things. I just want to confess something today here on the podcast, and that is something that I spoke about in last week's episode, which you guys probably haven't heard, obviously, but maybe if you go back and listen to that, I spoke about why you should take your job seriously. And one of the things that I spoke about was just making sure that you turn up on your schedule and not being able to compromise on that for anyone. And I feel like one of the things I almost did today was I almost just skipped out on this episode of the podcast because I had something else. I was asked by someone else to go do something this afternoon, and I thought, oh, that's okay. I can just push the podcast back to tomorrow and I can record the episode tomorrow. It's no worries. It doesn't need to be out till next week. I'll have heaps of time on that. But I had to sit back and had to think about why I was just so okay with just blowing off the episode until tomorrow. And although it may have been okay just to blow the episode off until tomorrow, I had heaps of time to edit it and have it out by next week. That's not the real point of what I was talking about last week. It's more the fact that I think it's so important to stick by that structure. And if you're going to take the job seriously in any aspect, I think that you need to be able to turn up and convince yourself that you can turn up every week, regardless of things that are happening in the world. You know, if I was here for a real job, I wouldn't just be having an afternoon off just because someone else asked me to go hang out with them and I can just catch up on that work tomorrow. That's not the way it goes. So for me, as someone who is just employed by themselves and just works from home, I think I need to stick to that routine and need to convince myself that I'm able to stick to that routine as well. It's not just as easy as changing my schedule just because I'm after an afternoon off or I need to go do something or I need an hour here and there, because if I'm going to keep on doing that, it just tells myself that it's okay and that it's okay to just change your schedule and not prioritize the things that you're really wanting to do and the things that you're really wanting to achieve in this business. So that's just one thing that I wanted to confess, but I am here. I am recording the podcast on the Monday, as I always do. But I'm actually thinking about, in the long term, changing the day of the podcast. And I'm thinking about changing the recording day and the release day. At the moment, it's released on a Friday. Every episode I've released basically on a Friday, but I'm thinking about releasing this episode on a Monday. So you guys will probably know before I do. Well, I don't know now. So if this episode does come out on a Monday, it has probably changed to Mondays, because I've been thinking a lot about it, and it was one of the things that I struggled with at the start. One of those things that I just overthought for way too long of when I should release the episode, whether I release it on a Friday, Monday, or Tuesday, whichever day of the week. And I initially thought Friday because I thought most people who I listen to podcasts of all release earlier in the week. They release Monday, Tuesday. And so I wanted to get that bit of a head start, I guess, in releasing on a Friday so that it's there on the weekend. If you did want to listen to it over the weekend, if you're going on a bit of a road trip or something like that, I like to listen to podcasts in the car as I'm driving. So I thought that'd be a great time to try and release it on a Friday so that people could get that in over the weekend if they're on the road, or it is there first thing Monday morning if you do want to listen to it then. But I've been recently thinking that I've been really hanging out on Mondays and Tuesdays for more people to release episodes, because I find myself listening to them while I'm at work during the week, while I'm out on a run in the mornings. I normally run early mornings through the week, so I've been looking for episodes to listen to there. I also thought about other people who are commuting to work, and that's not going to happen on the weekend. So if you are listening to episodes on your commute to work, those are things that can only happen through the week. So I'm thinking about changing it to a Monday, Tuesday. But I'm also thinking about changing my recording day. So my recording day at the moment's a Monday, and I haven't actually released the episode to the following Friday. So this episode won't come out for another week and a half, obviously depending on what day I intend to release it. But I've been thinking about changing that because there's been no way to gain any sort of feedback. And I think one of the important things in this is feedback, and constructive feedback, of course. I think it's important, and I think one of the things I am going to speak about today is feedback and sort of criticism in a way, and that how I'm trying not to listen to that and how I'm trying to not let that overcome me in that sort of way. And it's been easy, I guess, in a way, because no one's been listening to the podcast, but even if they had, I'm recording this episode before last week's episode even airs, so you wouldn't be able to give me feedback on that yet. So I don't even know what you had to say about it. But in the other way, I think it's important to get feedback on last week's episode. It's important to have constructive feedback, regardless of whether it comes from a good place or a bad place. Any feedback is able to be constructive, just depending on how you interpret it. And I think if someone is saying some negative things, maybe I do need to go back and have a look at some of the things that I've been speaking about and need to be a bit more coherent in those things. But also being able to get some sort of positive feedback as well is so important, because it really helps me to drive me forward as these episodes go on. I know I said last week, I think, about how it's been exponential and how I've been enjoying this process and every week on week has been improving. But I know I am going to start to hit a spot where it's all going to feel like there's no improvement week to week. And so being able to get that feedback and being able to say, well, last week's episode was so good, I really enjoyed the things you talked about, is just really helpful for me to know that I'm on the right track moving forward. And so I'm thinking about changing recording day to Tuesday and then having the release day on a Monday. So then I've got a little bit of overlap for people who are going to be there every Monday listening to every episode, that I know those people are going to be the ones who are going to give me good quality feedback. So I'll hear it Monday night and then record Tuesday's episode for the next week, and I'll have that bit of time and still have editing time up my sleeve, because that at the moment is the thing that is taking the longest, but I know that's going to get easier as we go along. Well, one last thing I wanted to touch on this week before I move on to the actual topic of today's episode is something that came up through the week, and I'm probably only sharing this because I know that there are more people listening to this episode, probably. I hope so. I really hope there are a few people listening to this episode that would know me in real life. So through the week, I was doing my personality type test with some other family members, and my partner and I were doing it. And it was super interesting to actually do the test and to read the results that I got. And I think I'm not really someone who believes in sort of star signs or anything like that. I don't think that you can really pinpoint someone just down and squeeze them into little categories like that and say everyone has to be the exact same, because there is no way that they can be. But I just found these personality types just so hilarious how accurate they were. And anyone who knows me, I'm just going to read out a little bit of it now. So mine was this, for anyone who's interested, is off the 16 Personalities website. So if you're interested, just go to 16 Personalities online and have a go at the test there, and you can get your personality type. Obviously, there's 16 to choose from, and mine was the Assertive Architect. Interesting for me because I had done it before, but it changed slightly from the last time I did it. I think I did it like a year and a half ago and completely forgot about what my answer was and had to go back and check it. But it had changed slightly, but not that much. And the one that I got this time was, I think, a lot more accurate than the one I got last time. I'm going to read a little bit of it, the explanations and a little bit of the descriptions that they said, just because I just feel like they're so hilarious and so on point with my actual personality here. It says, architects can be single-minded with little patience for frivolity, distractions, or idle gossip. That said, it would be a mistake to stereotype these personalities as dull or humorless. Many architects are known for their irrelevant wit, and beneath their serious exteriors, they often have sharp, delightfully sarcastic sense of humor. Architects are imaginative yet decisive, ambitious yet private, and curious yet focused. From the outside, these contradictions may seem baffling, but they make perfect sense once you understand the inner workings of the architect mind. For architects, life is like a giant game of chess, relying on strategy rather than chance. They contemplate the strengths and weaknesses of each move before they make it, and they never lose faith that with enough ingenuity and insight, they can find a way to win, no matter what challenges might arise along the way. I don't really have much more else to say about that, guys. I just wanted to share that because I think there'll be a lot of you listening who will agree with a lot of things they say. And I would definitely recommend, if you're interested, to go and check out your personality type. I think it did give a lot of insight for me personally, and just gave me a lot of things to reflect on. And a lot of things that I may have taken as a negative before in my personality, it was trying to tell me how they could be positives and how I can take things away from that. And so I think that was a really good way for me to sort of read and to understand a bit more about my own personality and sort of understand why I strive in certain situations and not in others. So if you do have a bit of spare time this week, guys, definitely recommend to give that a go. And I would love to hear from you guys what personality type you did get. If you did listen to this and did go and do the test, please send me a message and I'd love to hear from you guys. And now on to today's topic, which is all about sharing your work. And it's one of the things that I've really struggled with over the years, was really to try and get my work out there and trying to present my work in a way that I was proud. And because I felt like I had a lot of insecurities around my own work and around the things that I was producing and the things that I was up to, because I was always scared that there would be people out there who would have things to say about them. I wanted to start with today a few of those reasons, and I wanted to bring it back to why I haven't shared this podcast up until now. And I think the first reason for me is that there's just no risk of failure. in the way that if there's no one who knows about it, then I can't really fail at it in that way, because it's never going to be something that anyone will ever know that I have failed at. So there's no reason that I didn't have to be able to stick with it if it all got too hard after a few weeks, because there was no one else who knew that I was actually recording this anyway. So I never really had that risk of failure in a way. I think it's that age-old saying that you can't fail if you never try. I think for me it is really tough, and that can go sort of both ways. There is a train of thought which would say that you should really put yourself out there, and you should make yourself more accountable from the start, and make sure that other people know what you're up to, so that there is that risk of failure. And that is often something that can come back and be in the reverse, I guess, and make you more productive and more striving to do more, and to actually to turn up week to week, because you have people there holding you accountable for that. And I think that is one of the things that I am going to do going forward. And it is one of the reasons why I have really shared the podcast now, because I think it is going to help me get going forward, and having that accountability, and having people on my back about it, and having people know that it is going to be there every Monday, and I won't be able to just have weeks off or just end it all of a sudden without having something to say about it. So I think I know that that's going to be good going forward. But in the first few weeks, I really didn't want that sort of pressure on it, I guess, because I don't know, it was just something for me that I didn't really feel that I needed to do. It was more an interesting for me. And so having that sort of pressure from the start of other people there just really wasn't what I wanted to try be about. I know I've probably made about 15 to 20 videos on YouTube over the past probably 2 years, and I've only probably shared a handful of those towards the back end of last year, because early on I was just trying to make videos, and I didn't want that sort of pressure on me to produce them. I felt that if there was that pressure, that I wouldn't be able to succeed in the way that I really wanted to. I think for me, having people there and having people consume my content when it's not at 100% was always something that was really tough for me. And any sort of anything against the grain of what I wanted to hear, and in terms of the sort of feedback that I wanted to get, I think sometimes I would take that too harshly in a way, because I am a little bit of an over perfectionist in the way that I wanted it to be perfect before I let anyone in. Obviously, all the episodes are up there, so if you want to go back and listen to any of the first 4 episodes, they're all there ready for you guys to listen to. But I think in a way of producing them when there's no expectation, I think it was so much easier to start, because really it was just about me having a conversation just with myself, and no one else was on the other end listening to that. It just made it so much of an easier. I didn't have that big hurdle to overcome, I guess, in the first month or so, because it was just like any old conversation that I would have. I said it in the first week. I am normally someone who does talk to themselves. I probably shouldn't admit that on here, but I am, and that I think was just all this started out to be. It was just almost like a journal for me, like an audio journal in a way, and that's what I wanted it to be from the start. I obviously knew that eventually I would hopefully be able to turn it into some sort of a podcast, but that was the mentality I had to have from the start, that it was just some sort of audio journal for me, and something that I was just trying to do on the side without anyone else really ever knowing about. And that sort of leads me into point number 2, in that I wanted it to be something that I knew I could commit to. And that I did hear this, I heard this once, and I don't know where I heard it from. I think it was on a podcast. There were these guys who were making a podcast, and they didn't let anyone know about the first 20 episodes, I think it was. They were just making podcasts by themselves, didn't let anyone know. They said they had a few people obviously listening to their podcast. They'd obviously found them. They'd obviously had a bit of success in those first 20 episodes, but they hadn't actually let any of their friends and family know about the podcast. So no one actually knew that they were creating this podcast. And they said that was the best way to go about it for them, because they knew that once they got to the 20 episode mark, there was nothing that anyone could actually say to them that could then turn them off, because they were already in the swing of things. They'd already got everything down pat, and they were already so confident with the work that they were producing that it really wouldn't have mattered. But also in turn, all the feedback that they were then starting to get was all pretty positive feedback, because the work that they were producing was already to such a high standard, because they've already already ironed out all those kinks from the start, because they had that spare time. I think for most people, and like myself included, already know where their own flaws do lie. And so I feel like I don't need a lot of people to come and tell me what I've done wrong, because I already know what I've done wrong. And one of those things in the start was I had to really weigh up whether I wanted to wait until it was 100% ready to go before I actually released an episode and just have these episodes all on my computer and never put them out there into the world, or whether I just had to be happy with just releasing an episode every week. And I think in the end, I opted for that method because I had to release it at 80%, even if it wasn't 100% ready to go, because I can always improve on the next one. And I think any time that you spend completely trying to make something as perfect as you can, I don't think you're ever going to actually have anything out there in the world. You're never going to produce anything. You can never be creative with that because you aren't actually creating anything because you're spending too long on the same thing over and over and trying to perfect just this one thing. So for me, I wanted to get it out there, but I also didn't want it to be something that other people could then look at and start sending their own judgments my way because most of the things that needed to be improved, I already knew that they needed to be improved and they would improve with time. So I didn't need any of that, and I'm so glad actually that I did do that first 4 episodes because I think now I'm in the swing of things. I think it was easy for me to sit down here today, and it is only going to get easier to sit down here regardless of what other people are having to say about the style of this podcast. I'm pretty comfortable with the way that it's going to continue to roll on just like this. And as I said, it was just something for me as more of an audio journal as in a way. And so I had to be confident that I was just making this for me. And having those first 4 episodes just for me, I felt was a good reminder to myself that these episodes were a thing that I can look back on in years to come and be very proud of the things that I was able to produce, regardless of whoever enjoys this or gets actual value out of it. I think that is just an added bonus. So that was one of the other things. The other third point, I think, in why I didn't release it, and I think I've touched on it in the first 2, but obviously the stakes and the pressure do go up. It's hard to not release an episode that isn't as good as the one you released last week, or it's hard to release any piece of content that's not as good as the one you created before. And I know that I'm not going to hit the nail on the head every single week here. I know I'm not going to be producing quality content week in, week out. I think that is something that I've come to terms with, and I've had to come to terms with that in all my art forms, in that I know that every photo I take isn't going to be my best photo that I've ever taken. And it may not be as good as the one I took last week, but it's still part of that process in trying to improve and trying to get better. When there's people there placing their own expectations on something, it often can be hard, and it's easy to say, well, I can just remove that, and by not having anyone actually view my work, it's easy to take that out of it, I guess. It's easy to take that pressure out because no one's there to see the work, so they can't impose their own expectations. But then it's hard then to produce anything when there's no one there. When there is no one there expressing interest in your work at all, it's hard to keep producing. There's no one listening to the podcast. It's going to be very tough to keep on going on. So there has to be that sort of balance between the stakes in your own head and other people's expectations as well. I think that's one of the most important things, is to find that bit of a balance. And it's got to be that balance between the difficulty of the task and how much you enjoy the task. And for me, at the start, it was really hard and I didn't have much enjoyment, but I feel like now I'm starting to enjoy it a lot more and it's starting to become easier. But I've now got to add an extra bit of a layer on to make it harder for myself, and to now have other people actually listening to this episode. And I know that starting to go forward, and I know as I try and improve this podcast, and I'm trying to make it grow and trying to make more people actually want to spend their time and actually listen to this episode every week, I think that the expectations do go up, so therefore it does get harder, and it does get harder to continue on. But also at the same time, I want to keep being able to enjoy the art of creating this podcast, and so being able to have that good balance between those two and being able to push those both up at the same time is just where this all started. And so at the start, I knew it was going to be very high difficulty. I didn't enjoy it so much, but then taking away some of that difficulty and some of that anxiety around starting, I think was a good way for me to actually start the podcast. And that leads, I guess, into the last point that I really had, which was, I guess, a bit of anxiety and a bit of embarrassment around a task. I think it's not only with the podcast, I guess it's with anything that you really do in your own life, in that you're a bit embarrassed about the things that you're trying to do and you don't really want anyone to actually come and actually view your content. I know for me, I was so scared, I guess, every time I would make a YouTube video that there would be someone in my family or friends who would actually see that video. And I don't know why, because in my head I was proud of the content that I was making, but I really didn't want to share it with anyone else out of fear that they would say something about it. And it's not anything that I would be even talking about. I just didn't like the fact that anyone would know I was actually making YouTube content, or the fact that I'd be making a podcast or anything like that. I don't think I'm talking about anything that I particularly don't want them to know. But I think for them, it's a big change in who they think I am as a person. And that can sometimes be tough. And that can sometimes be one of those things that I need to sort of take a step back and think, well, I'm happy with the person that I am. I don't really care what other people think of me and the things that I'm trying to do with my life. So I really have to be comfortable in order to put that out there. It's a strange phenomenon in a way, because it's always the people who are the closest to you, who you fear what they will say. And it's surprising in that way, because they should be the ones who you really respect their opinion, and they should be the ones supporting you from the get-go. Whereas I think it is often the people closest to you who can have something to say, because they don't. I think those people have their own expectations of you already. For anyone just out there in the world who is listening to this episode who has no idea who I am, they wouldn't have any idea that this is outside the norm of something that I would normally do. And so they can't therefore have a judgment on whether they think that this is the right thing for me. They can, of course, have a judgment on the quality of the content, of which I'm sure there'll be many people who have things to say about the quality of the content. And I know in my own self that there are things that I could say about the quality of the content, but there's no one who could say something about whether they think that this is the path for me, I guess. It was one of the things that I really struggled with when I first started in photography. Actually, it was one of the real big things that I was concerned about and anxious about, in a way, was what other people would say about it. I know I started an Instagram account when I first started photography, because I started a new one because I was too embarrassed to put any of my photos on my actual personal account, because I knew all my friends and family were on there. And so I wanted an account where not everyone would know about, so I could just post my artwork on there. I could post all my photos and not have any risk of them actually saying anything about the things that I was trying to do in my spare time. I know it's a big thing for heaps of people. I know that a lot of people are scared to open up and be honest about things that they're interested in and things that they like to do, because a lot of people will see that as being something outside the norm for them. And for me, it did really hit me hard early, and that it hit me with my photography, that I was scared, because art had been something that I'd steered away from for so many years, and something that I was never really open about, and never really honest about the way that I had been expressing that. In the end, it came down to caring too much about the opinions of people who I really shouldn't be caring about their opinion. The types of people who had known me for the longest amount of time. The types of people who had known me since high school, since even primary school, and known the type of person who they thought I was. I was talking to someone the other day about the phenomenon of how much people can change in the course of the first 5 years out of high school. I think it's such a dramatic effect, especially for people who move away from their hometown. And I know heaps of people who are in that category and who've moved away from the style of friends who they had in high school. And it isn't to say there's anything wrong with the style of friends that I had in high school, or the style of friends that anyone has in high school. I think that change is a good thing, though. And I think opening yourself up to new experiences can then make you such a different person. And it's crazy to think how much of a change those people can have in just changing their environment and just changing the type of people that they're around and surrounded by. And that goes back to what I was saying, in that I was scared of the opinions of people who knew me through school, but I'd changed so much since then. And so why would I ever care what they thought of me based on someone who I am not anymore? And so being able to have a new Instagram account just to be able to post photos on, because they'd have something to say about it, because that isn't the person who I was, or that wasn't the person that I ever would be. I remember in school, I would often be the person who would just think anyone who was even on Instagram was just a strange thing, to be able to put so much of your life out there and to have that open for anyone in the world to see. But that's basically the whole thing that I do now, and especially with this podcast. I think I'm starting to share a lot more than I ever would, but I think that's a good thing. And I think it is one of the positive things to then come out of this podcast, is the fact that I'm trying to learn to be able to be more open, and learn to be open with my own feelings and the own things that I'm achieving in life. I think it's been very hard for me over the years to sort of share things in such an open way. And anyone who knows me would know that I'm not the most open sharer of things. But this podcast for me was that way, in that I didn't know how to really share things and have open and honest conversations with people, because I don't know why. I think I just thought that isn't the person who I am. And I think once again, I'd gone back to the thing of the person who I was in high school or before then, and I was scared to try and change from that because of how other people would think of me. And that was really one of the things with this podcast, in that I had to try and get over that fear and other people listening to this and thinking that I'm not the same person that I was when they first knew me, because I'm not the same person that I was when they knew me. And I think I had to be comfortable with that, and I had to accept that, and I had to be okay with the fact that I'm fairly comfortable with who I am, and it's okay to put myself out there. I'm so proud of the work that I've done in photography over the years, but I wouldn't have ever been able to get there if I'd never taken on that art form to start with, because there were heaps of people who said that was a bit strange, a bit weird for me to actually go and start in photography, and to go and to just even be interested in any art form for me was weird, as I said. But at the end of the day, I'm glad that I did put that out there, and I'm glad that I started that sort of work, because I never would have got where I am today. I look back, of course, on my early work in photography and think just how bad it was, but I think anyone who's ever grown obviously looks back on that. It's a bit of a strange place to be, I think, because on one hand, I'm very thankful for it, but on the other hand, I'm sitting here saying how bad it was. But I think both of those things show how far I've grown, in the fact that I can recognize that it's really bad work, but in the same, in that I'm proud that I did actually put that out there. And I think I will sit back at the end of this year and be proud that I started this podcast, because, as I said in episode 1, it's been something that I've been wanting to do for such a long time. And the fact that I've now started it and now am actually continuing with it and being able to keep up with it on a regular basis, I think is I think something that I will be proud of. And it's not something that I often am, and it's not something that I'm often, it's not an emotion that I often have, in that I'm being proud of something. I don't like to talk up things that I've done, but I think something that I will do is sit down and be really proud of this podcast, because it is something that I've been wanting to do for such a long time. And there were so many hurdles that I had to overcome to be able to produce this, in, as I said, just being able to be okay with the fact that I need to put this out there in the world. And I think it's so important. I don't think there's ever been anything good that's come from me not expressing who I am, or not trying to put myself out there in the world. You can only get things back off people if you're going to put things out there as well. And all the good things that I've received in my own work, and all the things that have made me want to continue, and all the work that I've gotten over the years in my own business now, having started my own business, and all the work that I've then started to get from that, is only from expressing interest in that, and really putting myself out there, and really sharing the work that I've done over the years, and sharing the stories and the things that, and the places I've come from, and where I started in this journey is a long way from where I am now. And I hope that in a year's time, I can look back on this and say, wow, how far have I come? Because I'm trying to create this podcast as a bit of a documentation of my life, and trying to be able to share with the people who are most interested along the way. I know that if anyone's still listening to this episode, I know that you guys are going to be the ones who are going to be here all the way through. And I know you're going to be the ones who turn up and listen to every episode every week. And you're the people who are going to support me through everything that I do, and always have supported me through everything that I've done. So I'm glad that I'm able to put this out there in the world. I'm glad that I'm in a position to put this out there in the world, but I'm glad that I have people who are going to be listening to these episodes and going to be able to give me feedback and support me in that way, and support me not only in this podcast, but in my life in general. And I think I'm so glad that I do put things out there, because, as I said earlier in the episode, I got those messages through the week about how some people were so inspired by the work that I was trying to do. And for me, that just really hits hard, to think that people would be inspired by things that I'm trying to do in my life, because I look at myself and think, I'm not really achieving that much in my life, but clearly to other people I am, and clearly I need to take a step back and step outside that, and actually have a think about the things that I am achieving, and think about how I can express those, and how I can talk about those successes, and talk about those failures, and talk about where I've come from. And I think this podcast is the perfect platform for that. And so I'm glad this week that it's out there. I'm glad that it's out in the world. I'm glad that people hopefully will listen to this episode. I'm sure there are people who are listening to this episode, and I'm glad that it feels like it's such a big weight off my back to finally get it out there. I think 99% of that fear all goes out the window as soon as I put the first one out there. And I think from now on, I'm not going to be fearing that first episode where people are listening to it. I'm not going to be fearing what they have to say anymore. I'm not going to be fearing that I can't actually talk about that I have a podcast because people don't know about it. But now I can talk about it, and now I can express the different things that I've been feeling and the things that I've been working on, and things that it's really one of the great things about this podcast is that people are going to be able to keep up with my life more than they ever would have been able to before, and more than they've ever been able to just with Instagram. And I know that people here who are listening to this episode are really going to try and are really the ones who are interested at the end of the day. And I hope to be able to provide some value. I hope that it's not just my friends and family listening to this episode, although I'm sure it only is. I'm sure there'll be no one out there listening to this episode who hasn't ever heard from me before. But once again, I'm so thankful that anyone would be here, and I would really love to hear from you guys after this episode to be able to see what you did think of it, and see if you do go back and listen to any of the other episodes. I'd love to hear some feedback. I'm trying to improve and trying to grow, and I do have a few episodes already lined up for the next couple of weeks. As I said, I've got quite a few episodes and things that I really want to talk about on this podcast. As I said, this is not just going to be just me ranting every week. It is going to be things that I've come across in my journey. The whole name of this podcast is My Creative Journey, because it is a very creative journey for me in my whole business and in my photography and in my whole life, in starting these new creative things in my life that a few years ago I would have never thought I would be able to do. So I'm going to be trying to share some of that stuff every week with you guys, and things that I've learned, and things that I've learned in my own personal life, but things I've learned in my business as well, and things that I just generally think people are going to be interested in. And so I'm so glad to have you guys along here listening. And as I said, I'd love to hear from you guys. Anything that you have to say, any sort of feedback, even if you want to say hello, would love to hear from that as well. So I think that is where I'm going to end today's episode, guys. And if you did get a few things out of today's episode, it would be make sure that you are sharing your work, and don't be scared to put your own self out there, because I think it does come back in spades, in that the way and the things that you can produce and achieve, actually being able to put yourself out there is so much more than you could ever think. And remember, 99% of that fear goes out the window as soon as you start to share it with other people, and it becomes more of a joyous thing, I think, and it's gonna just become so much easier when you can get that fear out the window and start to actually make things that you actually really will want to create, and create just for yourself, and create the things that make you happy. I think that's just so important, and not really caring about what other people think, but you have to get it out there and have to jump over that hurdle at some point. So you may as well jump at it. And that's where I'm going to leave it today, guys. I really hope you did enjoy this episode. If you did enjoy this episode, I would really appreciate it if you would consider leaving me a review on this episode, either on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. I know there are heaps of people who listen on both those platforms. I have the podcast is live on both those platforms, as I spoke about, I think, in episode 3. So if you guys could leave me a review, that would be so amazing. And I would really love to hear some of your feedback. As I said, you can message me on Instagram. I'd love to hear from you guys there. But otherwise, I will speak to you again, hopefully next Monday. I don't know what day this episode's coming out, as I said, but I think I'm going to switch it to Mondays. And I hope you guys are okay with that. If you're not, please let me know. I'd love to hear some feedback on what day you think I should release these episodes. As I said, I've been toying and froing with that idea of what day to release it, because I have been releasing on Fridays, as I said, up till now. If you'd rather it Fridays, please let me know and I can continue with the Fridays, but I think it'll go to Mondays otherwise. So I will speak to you guys next Monday.